The summer had arrived with a vengeance, and the sun beat down relentlessly on the neighborhood. I had spent the last few months pouring sweat, time, and money into restoring the old pool behind my house. It wasn't just any pool, it was the kind of pool that invited laughter, cannonballs, and long, lazy afternoons under the sun. I wanted it to be perfect, not just for me but for anyone in the neighborhood who respected boundaries and shared a little sense of community. The water sparkled like crystal, the deck was freshly stained, and the lounge chairs were lined up neatly, ready for summer afternoons. I felt proud. But pride, as it turns out, is often a target. Karen, our neighborhood's notorious HOA enforcer, had eyes on my pool from the moment the first glimmer of water appeared. She had always loved to control things that weren't hers, and now, with the pool finished, she saw an opportunity. One morning, she strutted over in her oversized sun hat, sunglasses perched imperiously on her nose, and began lecturing me before I had even poured my coffee. "This pool," she said, waving a finger dramatically at the water, "needs rules. I should be able to use it whenever I want. It's only fair, really." I blinked. "Karen, this is on my property. I have permits. The HOA doesn't control private pools." She scoffed. "Permits? HOA rules override your little permits. I'm just trying to maintain order here." Her voice carried that familiar tone that said she expected obedience without discussion. I tried to reason with her, explaining that the pool was private and that I had taken every legal step to ensure it complied with all city and county regulations. But she wasn't listening. Her gaze was sharp, her jaw set like a bulldozer. She wanted authority, and she wanted it now. When I politely refused her demand to reserve the pool for her exclusive use, she stiffened and muttered something about everyone paying their dues and enforcing the rules. I watched her storm back toward her house, her designer sandals clicking on the sidewalk like a warning bell. I knew this wasn't over. Karen thrived on conflict and drama, and I had just thrown down the gauntlet without meaning to. For the first time, I felt a twinge of unease. Summer was supposed to be carefree, full of swimming and sunshine, but with Karen, peace in this neighborhood was never guaranteed. Still, I rolled up my sleeves and reminded myself that I had done everything by the book. This pool was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone, even Karen, dictate how I enjoyed it. Little did I know, her next move would take things way beyond the normal HOA tantrum and drag the police right into my backyard. The following afternoon, the peaceful hum of summer in the neighborhood was shattered by the unmistakable wail of sirens. I had just stepped out to grab a cold drink when I noticed two police cruisers slowly rolling up the street. My heart skipped a beat. I had never had any real trouble with the law, nothing more serious than a parking ticket years ago, but the sight of those flashing lights immediately sent my mind racing. Within moments, two officers stepped out, professional but cautious, and began approaching me. Before I could even ask what was happening, Karen appeared on her porch, perfectly coiffed and wearing a smug expression, clearly reveling in the situation. "I called them because he's operating an unlicensed public facility," she announced to anyone who would listen, projecting her voice like a drill sergeant. I blinked, stunned. "What? My pool? It's private property," I exclaimed, but she waved me off, clearly convinced that she had already won. The officers listened politely as I explained, carefully showing them the permits and approval documents I had kept in a binder for exactly this kind of situation. I walked them through the history, how the pool had been approved by the city, the property boundaries, and the fact that the HOA had no jurisdiction over private amenities on my lot. Karen interjected repeatedly, trying to assert authority, but each time, I calmly countered her claims with facts. I could see the officer's expression shift, first polite patience, then quiet disbelief at Karen's insistence that she had some kind of special enforcement power. Neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some whispered among themselves, curious to see how this confrontation would play out. Karen's confidence seemed to falter a little as one officer asked to see her evidence or documentation supporting her claim. She fumbled with her phone, scrolling through emails and HOA notices, but nothing aligned with her assertions. The officers exchanged glances, clearly realizing that the complaint was baseless. Finally, one officer turned to her, voice firm but gentle. "Ma'am, it looks like this is all on private property and fully permitted. False reports can have consequences." Karen's face flushed a deep shade of red. For the first time, the proud, self-righteous aura she carried around the neighborhood wavered. I stood silently, trying to mask my satisfaction, as the officers nodded at me and returned to their car. The lesson was clear: Karen had overstepped, and she would have to answer for it. What I didn't know at that moment was that this confrontation was only the beginning, and that Karen's determination to assert control would only escalate in ways I hadn't imagined. Karen wasn't one to admit defeat, not even in the face of the police backing me up. That evening, she could be seen pacing her porch, muttering to herself about exploiting HOA authority and how this neighborhood needed proper oversight. I had hoped the police visit would settle the matter, but Karen had a way of turning minor setbacks into full-blown vendettas. The next day, she began circulating flyers and emails to other HOA members, claiming that the pool was a shared amenity and that I was violating HOA rules. I could already sense the brewing storm. When the HOA board held its next meeting, Karen presented her case with her usual flair. She had a binder of alleged violations and a slide deck she had clearly prepared for dramatic effect. I attended the meeting, calmly seated with my own documentation, deeds, zoning approvals, permits, and even statements from neighbors who had witnessed her harassment. As Karen spoke, I could see skepticism growing in the eyes of the board members. They were familiar with her theatrics, and the documentation I presented made it clear that her claims had no legal basis. As I explained the details, including precise property lines and the history of the permits, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Karen's voice, once commanding and certain, grew frustrated. She tried to interrupt, but each time, the board politely asked her to hold her comments while I finished my explanation. It was clear to everyone present that I had acted within the law, and that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my private pool. The room was quiet for a moment, filled with tension, before murmurs of agreement began to ripple through the other residents. The meeting ended with a formal warning from the board to Karen about spreading misinformation and filing baseless complaints. Her confidence was shaken, but she was not yet defeated. However, word of her antics quickly spread throughout the neighborhood. Social media posts, friendly chats, and even casual conversations in the park highlighted the reality: Karen had tried to bully a neighbor over a legally compliant private pool, and she had failed spectacularly. By the end of the week, the HOA began receiving multiple complaints about her behavior. Misuse of authority, unnecessary harassment, and false claims were being formally recorded. Karen, who had once been feared for her relentless enforcement of HOA rules, was suddenly on the defensive. Her overreach had backfired, and she was now facing scrutiny from her own organization. Meanwhile, I felt a quiet sense of vindication. My pool was still mine, and summer could finally continue without interference from Karen or anyone else who thought they could wield power without accountability. Karen's blunder didn't just embarrass her, it set off a chain reaction that would change the HOA forever. Within days of the meeting, the board decided to conduct a full audit of the association's records, prompted by the numerous complaints about Karen's behavior. As the investigators combed through financial statements, invoices, and meeting minutes, they uncovered a series of troubling irregularities: funds that had been used for personal purchases, approvals granted without proper documentation, and decisions made unilaterally that clearly violated the HOA's bylaws. Karen's reputation, once feared and untouchable, was crumbling before the entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, I focused on reclaiming the sense of community that Karen had tried to hijack. With her power diminished and her credibility shot, I organized a neighborhood barbecue by the pool, inviting everyone except Karen. Children splashed in the water, neighbors lounged on the deck with cold drinks, and laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the tense confrontation just weeks earlier. The smell of grilled food mingled with the scent of sunscreen and pine trees, and it was clear that the pool